I never thought a single glance could feel like trespassing. She was sitting at the edge of the library table, her hands wrapped around a chipped coffee mug, and the late afternoon sunlight caught the silver streaks in her hair, making them glow like a halo she didn't ask for. I tried to look away, because I knew some rules are meant to be broken only in stories, not in life. But my eyes kept finding her. She was the wife of my teacher, and yet here she was, leaning over a stack of papers with that quiet authority that made the room shrink around her. I could feel my pulse in my ears, and it wasn't because of the papers or the books, it was her. There was a softness in her lips, a vulnerability I wasn't supposed to notice, and maybe that was what made it so dangerous. I cleared my throat and tried to sound casual when I said, "Do you need a hand with that?" She looked up, eyes catching mine, and there was this pause, long enough to make my stomach tighten. She tilted her head, brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear, and smiled in that careful, knowing way that felt like both an invitation and a warning. "I think I've got it," she said softly, but her voice wasn't dismissive. It was warm, and it made my hands itch to reach across the table. I sat down anyway. My leg bumped hers under the table, and I could swear she felt it too, that faint brush of contact that made everything else in the room blur. There was a hum in the air, something electric, unspoken. I caught myself staring at the way her fingers lingered on the papers, the way the sunlight pooled around her like she belonged to some other world, a world I wasn't supposed to enter. She laughed quietly at something I muttered, and it sounded too soft, too intimate for the space we were in. I felt my cheeks warm, and I tried to hide the awkwardness by flipping through a notebook, pretending I was absorbed in work. But nothing could mask the pull I felt toward her, the way every small movement seemed like a secret message meant only for me. "You're breaking all the rules," she said suddenly, almost a whisper, eyes flicking to mine but not fully meeting them. There was a sharpness beneath the softness, a thrill that made my heart jump. I wanted to ask what she meant, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I nodded, trying to appear casual, but I knew she could see right through it. The library felt smaller then, as if we had collapsed the world down to this single moment, sunlight on her hair, the scent of coffee and old paper, and the unspoken something hanging between us. She was closer than propriety allowed, and I was farther than I should ever dare to be. And yet I didn't move away. I wanted to say something reckless, something honest, but the words stumbled before they could escape. My hand hovered near hers, as if drawn by some invisible thread, but I stopped. The tension was unbearable, electric. I could see the same restraint in her eyes, the same temptation, the same fear. Then the quiet was broken by a sudden sound, a doorbell ringing somewhere distant, a sharp intrusion in our suspended moment. She froze, and so did I. Something about the way she looked at me made my pulse spike again, and I could feel the weight of every unsaid thing pressing down on us. And just like that, the world seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see who would blink first. I couldn't stop thinking about her after that day in the library. The way she laughed at something so small, the way her eyes caught the light, it stayed with me, like a song I couldn't forget. But there was a weight to it too. She wasn't just someone I was drawn to, she was my teacher's wife. Married. Untouchable. She had a way of moving through a room that made everyone notice, but with me, it was different. She didn't just notice me, she lingered in a way that made my chest ache. I remembered the first time I'd really seen her, years ago, when she had come to the school for a parent-teacher conference. I had been nervous, fumbling over a question about calculus, and she had smiled, not the polite smile you give strangers, but one that made me feel seen, like I mattered. I couldn't explain why, but from that moment, there was something magnetic about her. And now, sitting across from her in the quiet of the library, I realized she had her own ghosts. There was a softness in her laughter, but also a tension in her shoulders, a flicker of sadness when she thought no one was watching. I imagined a life full of obligations and compromises, a life that had made her cautious, reserved, even when she wanted to reach for more. I wanted to reach for that, too, even if I wasn't supposed to. Every time she spoke to me, I caught myself reading between the lines, trying to find a trace of invitation in the way her fingers brushed the edge of the table, or the pause before she answered. I had my own shame to wrestle with, being 20 and hopelessly captivated by someone I shouldn't want, someone who had already lived so much more than I had. The thought made me both reckless and careful at the same time. We started spending small amounts of time together under the pretext of school projects. She would show me a method for solving a problem, and our fingers would almost touch over the notebook. I would look up, and she would be staring at the page, but I could feel her presence like a current running between us. Every glance, every brief, accidental touch, seemed loaded with something neither of us dared to name. One rainy afternoon, we were forced to wait out a storm in the empty classroom. The hum of the radiator filled the silence. I tried to focus on my notebook, but she was too close. Her elbow brushed mine as she reached for a pen, and I froze, heart hammering. She looked up, caught my gaze, and didn't pull away. For a long moment, it was just the two of us, the rain drumming against the windows, the smell of damp coats and old books, and an unspoken understanding that we had crossed some invisible line. Then she smiled, soft and slightly guilty, and whispered, "You make it impossible to concentrate." And somehow, that tiny acknowledgement, a brush of fingers and a shared secret tension, made the world shrink until it was only us, suspended between desire and fear. It was impossible to act normal. Every time I saw her, the world seemed louder, brighter, smaller, all at once. And yet, just as quickly, guilt would crash down like a wave. She was married. She was the reason I had a teacher who actually cared, and I was 20, still figuring out boundaries I didn't have the right to cross. That evening, I found myself in her living room, ostensibly helping her set up a bookcase she couldn't manage alone. The smell of vanilla candles and old leather filled the room, and I realized with a start how intimate it all felt. The rain tapped against the windows, echoing the thrum in my chest. She laughed at my clumsy attempt to lift a shelf, and her hand brushed mine, longer than it should have. I froze. "I can manage," she said, but her voice wavered slightly. Her eyes searched mine, and I swear I saw a flicker of the same longing I felt. I wanted to lean in, to see if the spark between us could turn into something undeniable. But then the door opened. Her husband stood there, holding a glass of wine, eyes narrowing at the scene. "Everything okay in here?" he asked, a casual tone that didn't mask the tension. I stepped back immediately, heart racing, feeling the heat rise in my face. She smiled at him, quick and polite, but her hand lingered just a fraction too long on the edge of the shelf. The air between us crackled. I wanted to say something, anything, but the words caught in my throat. After he left, the room felt smaller, tighter, as if the walls were pressing in on us. We were both silent, either daring to move first. I wanted to apologize, to step away, to tell her I shouldn't be here. Instead, I stayed, trapped in that magnetic pull I couldn't resist. "Why do you keep doing this?" I heard her whisper. Not at me, not entirely, but enough to pierce through the fog of my hesitation. I don't know," I admitted, voice barely above the hum of the radiator. My hands trembled slightly, and I could see her notice, could feel her attention on me like a weight. "I shouldn't want this." She bit her lip, gaze dropping to the shelf, then back up. "Neither should I." And yet, every word we denied, every glance we avoided, seemed to pull us closer. A shared memory, her laughing at something small I'd done that first week in class, floated between us, unspoken but electric. I stepped slightly closer, careful, afraid, and she didn't move away. The distance closed, and I could feel the heat of her presence against my arm. Then the phone rang. My roommate, probably wondering why I hadn't come home. She flinched at the sound, and so did I. The moment shattered, leaving a sharp, aching awareness of what we were risking. But the air was still heavy with what had almost happened. Her fingers twitched, brushing against the edge of the shelf again, and I wanted nothing more than to reach for them, to finally cross the line. We didn't speak. Neither of us moved. Yet in that suspended second, the tension was more intimate than any words could ever be. I shouldn't have been there. I knew it the moment I saw her laughing at the phone, sitting across from another student in the cafe where we sometimes met to study. My stomach sank like a stone. I hadn't realized until then how possessive I'd become, how sharp the pull of jealousy could feel when she smiled at someone else. She looked up at me, startled, and my chest tightened. I didn't think you'd. Her voice trailed off, and for a second, the space between us felt like a chasm I couldn't cross. I didn't think I'd see you, I said, voice rougher than I intended. My fingers curled around the edge of the table, knuckles white. She frowned slightly, but there was no anger, only that careful, unreadable look she always gave me. Are you upset? She asked softly, leaning forward slightly. There was curiosity, yes, but also something else, a hint that she wanted me to be honest. I swallowed, heart hammering. Maybe I am, I admitted, and the words felt dangerous as soon as I spoke them. I don't want anyone else near you. Her hand froze mid-gesture, the cup of coffee hovering between us. Her eyes softened, but I could see the shadow of caution there. You can't, that's not, I know. I interrupted, leaning a fraction closer, the weight of my desire pressing against every boundary I had sworn to keep. I know it's wrong. I know. But I can't stop thinking about you. Every time you laugh, every time your hand brushes mine, I feel like I'm losing my mind. Her fingers twitched as she set the cup down. She didn't move away, didn't pull back, but the tension in her shoulders told me she was fighting herself. You're reckless, she whispered. And I. She stopped, as if the words she wanted to say would shatter something fragile. I reached out before I could think better of it, and our fingers touched. Just a brush, but the world seemed to tilt. The heat between us ignited, and I could see her breath hitch slightly. Do you even realize what you're doing? She asked, voice low, trembling. I do, I said, though the truth was, I barely did. All I knew was that I wanted her closer, needed her closer, in a way that terrified me. And I don't care. Her gaze dropped for a moment, then snapped up to mine, a flicker of fear mingled with something deeper, something I couldn't name but recognized in my own chest. Desire. Longing. The reckless part of me that had been dormant until now. For a heartbeat, we just stared at each other, the cafe noise fading to nothing, the world shrinking down to this impossible, dangerous moment. I wanted to close the distance, wanted to bridge the line between us that should never be crossed, but I stopped myself. Or maybe she did, with that sharp inhale, that subtle step back, that trembling lip she bit. And then the door opened behind her, the sound slicing through the tension like a knife. Someone entered, someone who wasn't supposed to witness any of this, and the spell broke. I didn't move. She didn't move. And yet, in that charged silence, it was clear, nothing could go back to how it was before. I thought I had a handle on things, on the careful, impossible rhythm we had established. I thought I could keep my feelings contained, the longing buried under polite smiles and stolen glances. But I was wrong. It happened the next afternoon. I was walking back from the library when my phone buzzed. A single text from an unknown number. I saw everything yesterday. She's not as careful as she thinks. My stomach dropped. Every heartbeat screamed danger, every memory of yesterday replaying in sharp relief. I didn't know who it was, but the implication was clear, someone had seen us. I rushed to the cafe, hoping to warn her, to figure out what had gone wrong. But she was already there, waiting. Her eyes met mine, wide, startled, but there was also a trace of fear that hadn't been there before. You need to tell me what's going on, I said, voice low, almost pleading. She ran a hand through her hair, tugging at the strands nervously. It's nothing, she murmured, but the tightness in her jaw, the trembling of her fingers said otherwise. I shook my head. It's not nothing. Someone saw us. Someone knows. I don't care how careful we've been, this isn't just between us anymore. Her breath hitched, and she pressed a hand to her chest. I thought I could handle it. I thought I could control everything. But now... She trailed off, voice breaking slightly. I reached for her hand, hesitant, afraid to touch yet unable to resist. "We can still figure this out," I whispered. "We just need to be honest. No more hiding." Her gaze fell to the table, fingers tracing the rim of her coffee cup. "You don't understand," she said, voice low, almost a whisper. "If anyone finds out, it won't just be awkward. It could ruin everything, my marriage, your future, even my reputation." I swallowed hard. I did understand. And that understanding made my chest ache, made the impossible pull between us feel even more dangerous, more urgent. "I can't stop thinking about you," I said, the words tumbling out despite the fear. "I don't want to stop. And I don't think you do either." She looked up then, eyes glistening, and for a moment, all the caution she had maintained melted into vulnerability. I don't know if I can," she admitted. Her voice was almost inaudible, but I felt it like a weight pressing into me. We stayed like that for a long silence, the cafe noise fading to background hum. I wanted to close the distance, to reach for her, and claim what had been simmering between us for months. But then her phone buzzed, a call from her husband. She froze, and I could see the panic in her eyes. The fragile bubble of our world had burst. What we thought was secret, safe, untouchable, wasn't. And now, more than ever, every choice felt like it could break us completely. We didn't speak. We didn't move. We only stared at each other, caught between desire and consequence, knowing the game had changed, and the next move could destroy everything. The rain had stopped, but the air still carried its weight, wet asphalt, the faint scent of damp earth, and something heavier, something unsaid between us. I found her outside the cafe, coat wrapped tight around her, hands trembling as she clutched her bag. "I can't do this," she whispered before I could even speak. Her voice cracked, a mix of fear and longing, and I saw the storm in her eyes mirrored my own. "I know," I said, stepping closer, trying not to let my desire overshadow the honesty in her gaze. "But I can't stay away either." Her fingers brushed mine, not quite a touch, but enough to send a shiver up my arm. "Every time it's wrong. Every time we get close, I feel like I'm betraying everything I've built. And yet here we are," I murmured, voice raw. Neither of us walked away. Not completely. She closed her eyes for a moment, exhaling sharply, like she was trying to release the tension building inside her. "I don't want to hurt anyone," she said. "But I can't pretend anymore. Not to you. Not to myself." I reached out, fingertips brushing hers again, this time holding on longer. "Then we don't pretend," I said. "We just exist in this moment. Whatever comes next, we face it together. Even if it's messy, even if it's impossible." Her eyes opened, searching mine for the courage she knew she needed but couldn't find alone. "You're reckless," she whispered, and I laughed softly, a breathless sound that matched the tension. "And you're irresistible," I replied, heart pounding, knowing the truth of it was undeniable. We stood there, the world shrinking until it was just us, the wet street, the fading light, the electricity that had always simmered beneath our cautious exchanges. My hand moved to hers, fingers intertwining naturally, as if they'd known this was inevitable all along. "I can't promise it'll be easy," she admitted. "There will be consequences. People will talk, assumptions will be made. I don't know if we can survive it all." "I don't care," I said, gripping her hand tighter. "Not as long as we're honest now. Not as long as we're together, even for a moment like this." She tilted her head, resting her forehead briefly against mine, a gesture that felt like both surrender and defiance. "Then we do it," she whispered. "We take this. Even if it burns us later." And in that moment I knew we had crossed the line we'd danced around for months. The fear, the guilt, the desire, they all collided and melted into something real, messy, human. Something that didn't have to be perfect to matter. We didn't kiss, not yet, but the tension between us was enough. Enough to know that nothing would ever feel the same. Enough to understand each other in ways words could never capture. Somewhere in the distance, a car honked, a reminder that the world kept moving. But for once, we didn't have to. For now, it was just her and me, standing on wet pavement, knowing that whatever came next, we had chosen each other. And maybe that was all that mattered. Weeks had passed, but nothing between us felt ordinary. We learned to navigate the lines we had crossed carefully, with that quiet understanding that every touch, every glance, carried weight. It wasn't easy, far from it, but it was real, and real had always been worth more than safe. I found her in the little bookstore we liked, the one with the warm yellow light and the scent of old paper. She was tucked into a corner, flipping through a worn novel, and when she saw me, that small, knowing smile appeared, the one that made the world shrink again, just like it had months ago in the library. "Hi," I said softly, approaching her. "Hi," she replied, her voice carrying that familiar mix of calm and tremor. It was quiet, intimate, and for a second, we both just stood there, suspended in a comfortable silence. We talked, carefully, deliberately, about books, about life, about the small things we could share without fear. And yet, every sentence seemed to echo what we both wanted but couldn't fully say. My hand brushed hers as I reached for a book, and she didn't pull away. She just let it linger, that small acknowledgement of everything that had happened, everything we dared to feel. It wasn't a grand gesture. There were no fireworks, no dramatic declarations. But it was enough to remind us that this connection, messy and complicated as it was, had survived. It had grown stronger in the quiet, in the stolen moments, in the vulnerability we had both allowed. I thought about all the risk, all the forbidden tension, and realized it had brought us here, not to perfection, but to understanding. We had faced fear, desire, jealousy, and doubt, and we had chosen each other anyway. She looked up from the book, her gaze soft but steady. "We're making this work," she said quietly. There was a tinge of wonder in her voice, as if she couldn't quite believe we had come this far. "We are," I agreed, and for the first time in months, I felt calm, even hopeful. Hopeful didn't mean naive. It meant we were willing to navigate the unknown together, whatever that entailed. We lingered in that bookstore a little longer, the hum of the quiet shop around us, the smell of paper and coffee mingling with the subtle warmth between us. There was no rush, no urgent need to define the future. For now, it was enough to be here, to exist in a space that was ours, fleeting but real. As we stepped outside, the sunlight caught her hair, just like the first time I noticed it, silver streaks glinting softly, halo-like. And I realized, we had crossed the impossible, survived the risk, and found something human, fragile, and true. I squeezed her hand once, a quiet promise in that simple touch. We didn't need more words, our silence said enough. And as we walked down the street together, the future uncertain but ours to face, I couldn't help but feel that maybe, just maybe, the rules we'd broken had led us exactly where we needed to be. Did you enjoy the story? What kind of stories would you like to hear next?